folks, I've been told this by high-up folks. They say, listen, Obama and Hillary both smell like sulfur.
There's nothing new, of course, about using media to commit political slander. 1796, an anonymous editorial accused Thomas Jefferson of cowardice, of running away from British troops. The unidentified author? The current toast of Broadway.
Alexander Hamilton!
Our revered founding fathers could sling mud with the worst of them. It's not the nastiness that's new, it's the delivery systems. A radio talk show host by the name of Alex Jones can be heard nationwide spreading the manure that fertilizes conspiracy theories all over the internet.
PizzaGate, as it's called, is a rabbit hole that is horrifying to go down. Now,
the charge that Hillary Clinton and her campaign manager, John Podesta, were running a child pornography ring out of the basement of a Washington pizza restaurant did not, as best we can tell, originate with Jones. The accuser remains anonymous, but that story had real consequences.
28-year-old Edgar Welch, after driving from North Carolina, entered the pizzeria and fired shots from a semi-automatic rifle. No one was hurt. He told police he came to rescue child victims.
For weeks now, people have been accusing Lissa Muscatine and Bradley Graham of smuggling children through an underground tunnel from their bookstore, Politics and Prose, to the pizza restaurant.
Are the threats over? No, they're not over. They continue, both online and on the phone.
And I really call it the weaponization of social media and the internet. What it's entitling people to do, or enabling people to do, is to take completely false information, make up whatever they want with no accountability.
So what do? You call the police, the FBI.
Turns out there's quite a high bar that's required for police and the FBI to take action, thanks to our First Amendment protections.
Has that made you rethink whether the First Amendment needs some modifications given the age in which we live?
It certainly has. You know, my father actually lost a job in defense of the First Amendment back in the McCarthy era. So I am probably more than most people pretty sensitive to that issue. However, we live in a different world now, and it's a brave new world that we still have not figured out. The purveyors of this stuff have been able to run rampant with no accountability and been able to do damage fairly freely.
Hold on, though. We love the First Amendment, free speech, the right to criticize our leaders, protection, among other things, for our cartoonists, comedians, satirists.
Testing, Gina.
Until recently, the targets of satire were obliged to grit their teeth, grin, and bear it. But the shape of the battlefield has changed.
Google, what is ISIS?
Many more people received Donald Trump's tweet reacting to the Alec Baldwin impression than those who saw the original skit on NBC.
Ted, you've been doing this for a million years. The average American could never have gotten to you and said, hey, Ted, you know, you missed this point.
Glenn Beck has among the most popular radio shows in the nation.
Now there's parody on social media. The downside is that there is no gatekeeper, and there's not a real feeling of personal responsibility online.
In his time, Beck promoted some of the wildest right-wing conspiracy theories out there.
The president's life, as you will see, is pure fiction.
This is the new revised Glenn Beck.
Since, really in the last year and since the election, been on as many sources as I can to beg the media to learn from my mistakes. You know, sometimes you have a road to Damascus moment. I've had my road to Damascus moment. And if we don't change this, if we can't find our way to each other, it's only going to get worse.
Which puts Glenn Beck on roughly the same page as Pope Francis. His Holiness compared media's obsession with scandal and ugly things to the sickness of coprophagia. If you're just finishing breakfast, look it up later. But it's nasty. It can, however, also be profitable. Margaret Sullivan is media correspondent for the Washington Post.
There is now an industry out there of people who are producing things that are untrue and that are highly shareable, which is the magic word. It's engagement. It's all about engagement. If you can get things shared, you may actually be able to make money from it.
How does it work? Sort of a fraction of a penny for every hit that you get?
Yes. BuzzFeed reported this, that they're great story, that there was a group of teenagers in Macedonia who were doing nothing but coming up with fake news stories. They set up their own sites and they registered to attract advertising through Facebook. You know, they put these stories out there, made up to be wrong, but sounded believable enough that people started sharing them, and they could make, pretty good money for teens in Macedonia.
Just this week, Facebook implemented a new policy that will make it more difficult for the purveyors of fake news to get paid. But fake news is far from being the greatest threat. So one of your correspondents comes to the editorial board of the Washington Post and says, here's this story, which was leaked by the Russians to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks has just leaked it to us. And we've checked on it, and it turns out to be true. What do you do with that?
Well, we actually faced that choice throughout the past few months.
Exactly. So if it's true, you run it.
Well, if it's newsworthy.
Josh Earnest is White House press secretary.
So what the Russians did in the context of the election was to go and take information that was stored privately, hack into it, and release it selectively over the course of many, many days in an effort to try to politically damage, or at least erode confidence in our political system in a way that did politically damage one candidate for president.
If indeed the Russians have been engaged in trying to delegitimize one candidate, aid another candidate, undermine the electoral process, that comes dangerously close to a belligerent act, doesn't it?
Obviously, it's an unwelcome one, and that's why you've seen such a robust response from the U.S. government.
Well, I haven't seen a robust response.
Well, you've seen a robust response in terms of basically making clear publicly and in private.
I've heard a lot of talk.
Yeah.
Has there been any response?
Well,
a robust response?
Well, talk matters. What also matters
It only matters if you follow it up with action. And before leaving on vacation, President Obama hinted broadly that action was either forthcoming or had already been taken. The president also urged us to look in the mirror.
If fake news that's being released by some foreign government is almost identical to reports that are being issued through partisan news venues, then it's not surprising that that foreign propaganda will have a greater effect.
Is this an area where the First Amendment remains relevant?
I think it's always relevant, right? It's the foundation of our democracy. But one of the things that we accept as citizens of the United States are reasonable and responsible limitations on our constitutional rights. For example, and I think most famously, the Supreme Court has said you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that could pose a threat to the public.
Well, if there was one statement of one justice in one case that I could eradicate from the face of the earth, it would be Oliver Wendell Holmes' statement about crying fire in a crowded theater.
Jonathan Turley is a First Amendment scholar at George Washington University.
I think there is a lot of reason to be worried. There's no question that mainstream media is collapsing on many fronts. The competition from the internet is insurmountable. But more importantly, people now have the ability to create their own personal echo chambers, to go to news sources that reaffirm their feelings. The question is, how do we solve that problem? The one way we cannot do that is to look to the government. That's a siren's call of censorship.
What's the alternative? Civility? Objective reporting? A renewed respect for facts? It's a thought.